Okay, thank you, Miffy, and good morning, everybody, and welcome along to the FPMT introductory program called Discovering Buddhism. Now, the module we're engaged in is called Mind and Its Potential, and this is the fourth class. So, our teacher, the Buddha Shakyamuni, says that all phenomena are expressions of the mind. So the mind is the most important thing to work with within the trainings that the Buddha taught. So we're basically trying to transform the mind. So what we can do right now is to adjust your physical posture so that you feel quite comfortable in your seat, and then become aware of the process of your breathing. So try to feel the breath anywhere in the body. And allow yourself to breathe normally and naturally. And while you breathe normally and naturally, allow the body to relax and the mind to be at ease. And with your mind at ease, recollect that our aim is to free everyone from misery by us first abandoning attachment to the fantasies of just this life, and then to all the pleasures of cyclic existence, to our own singular welfare, and to grasping at independent and objective existence to be real. And then imagine that our teacher and the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas of the 3 times and 10 directions are in the space above us, and all sentient beings cover the ground in front of us. Now, to produce the mental process of skillful means, indivisible from wisdom, we need to refresh our knowledge of the new direction that we've set for ourselves, and encourage every other living being to do the same by seeking an inner refuge from the depths of their heart. And since only the 3 jewels and the Lama indivisible protect that effect within us, let's take refuge together and generate the altruistic wish to become fully enlightened for the welfare and benefit of others. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Now, to stabilize and enhance this wish for full enlightenment for the sake of others, we'll recite the 4 immeasurable thoughts together. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. And may all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. To bring about the enlightenment we seek for the benefit of others, we need to abandon forms of thought and behavior, and develop all the positive qualities required to help others. This is all summed up in the 7-limb prayer, so we'll recite that together now. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginning this time and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my merits and the merits of all others to the great enlightenment. Now we're going to make an offering to the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas and the other enlightened beings who are in front of us. I think that the essence of this is just the process of letting go, of grasping at anything to be real. For the short mandala offering, this ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this is a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamnaryatayami. So we have released the offering, and it's accepted by the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in front of us. They smile at us in delight and begin to dissolve into light, into the central figure of Shakyamuni Buddha. An emanation of light leaves from the Buddha's heart, moves through space and comes to abide above the crown of your head. It descends, entering the crown of the head and coming down to rest at the heart. The light expands, filling your body and filling your mind. The light expands further, going up through the pores of your skin, filling the 10 directions of space. Wherever there are living beings, they are touched and pervaded by this light. And every type of negativity vanishes, all good qualities appear. This vast field of sentient, of enlightened beings, once again dissolves into light and enters your heart. Dissolves into the very subtle mind that you possess and awakens the potential you have to be fully awakened, fully enlightened. And by doing so, think that you're able to listen to this teaching, contemplate it, and to put it into practice, thereby bringing about the welfare of yourself and every other living being. Now breathing in deeply through your nostrils, exhale through your mouth. Feel embodied and in the presence of the screen and your room. And so thank you everybody for engaging with me in these preliminary practices. And now we'll begin the actual teaching.
Eddie, can you just sit a little bit closer to, you've just gone quiet for me. I'm not sure if you've gone quiet for everybody else, but thank you.
Okay, I'm going to share the screen now.
Okie dokie.
Okay, so here we are, the first slide in class 4. So this is what we've covered. We've looked at these 5 topics: precious human rebirth, defining the mind, levels of consciousness, continuities of mind, and last week I introduced the concept of Buddha nature. And you heard that this idea is understood differently within the Buddhist systems. So within the Sanskrit system, and in particular the middle way consequentialist system, they describe Buddha nature as a phenomenon It has the potential to transform into any of the Buddha bodies. Whereas within the system of mantra, the Buddha nature is described as the subtlest mind wind that is empty of inherent existence and whose continuity goes on to full awakening. In terms of the continuities of mind, I introduced you to 4 continuums of consciousness and gave you an example of each. I presented these continuums with either a gross or a subtle nature, which belong to either this life, the bardo, the path, or the result. So some had beginnings and ends, while others had a beginning and no end. I also presented minds with a continuum with no beginning and an end, and there was also the continuum with no beginning and no end. So mind itself is a subjective event that arises in dependence on the object that appears to it. And the nature and entity of this mind is clarity. Clarity means that the mind is a non-physical, non-obstructive entity with a reflective capacity that is dependent and empty. And the function of mind is to know. So we have clear and knowing, and this is how the mind is defined. Whereas the person is the I imputed to any of the 5 aggregates. When we look at this person, in particular the person who has a precious human rebirth, we try to become familiar with that topic. So we can generate ourselves all the favorable conditions and use our spare time skillfully to develop the mind through the study and practice of the teachings that the Buddha and his lineage have passed on to us. Now, there are many theories about how we've come to be here. And one of them, of course, is the theory of evolution. But evolution itself has never satisfactorily explained the origin of the highly valued positive emotions like empathy and compassion. And according to the teachings of the Buddha, our fundamental motivation in life is the quest for happiness. And love and compassion are considered basic to human nature. So from this point, we are essentially altruistic, which contradicts the generally accepted Western view that negativity is the norm. So in today's topics, we're going to look at 2 forms of happiness and the sources of happiness and suffering. Then we're going to look at 4 distortions of the mind and the the correct view. So we see these minds being distorted by particular ways of looking, and then we're going to look and see how actually these are actual distortions, so we can bring the mind so it's undistorted and it's getting its phenomena correctly. Independent on that, we can sort of change our worldview and bring a new purpose to our life. So this is what we'll talk about today. And here are some of the books I've relied upon. Now, the top 4 books describe the afflictions and their antidotes using the basis of knowledge contained in the books on the lower shelf, the 3 books on the bottom. The book called The Foundation of Buddhist Practice presents the view of all Buddhists. So we can become a Buddhist through either view or through faith. And this here is called the view, and this view is called the Four Seals. So some of you might be familiar with that. You know, these four seals, what can you say? These four teachings or four ideas seal knowledge as being Buddhist inner knowledge. And these four seals in brief are impermanence, dukkha or suffering, the state of unsatisfactoriness, empty and selfless. So these views have to do with these four distorted ways of thinking that we'll talk about a bit later. Samsara, Nirvana and Buddha nature. So I've relied quite a lot on that in these readings that I'll be presenting to you today. They really show more about the self and the four truths that are in relationship to that self. It also presents a very good overview of the afflictions and their antidotes and how they arise. And lastly, following the Buddha's footsteps, introduce us to the three higher trainings and the four establishments of mindfulness, which are also very, well, they're sort of primary in a way to help us overcome the afflictions and so forth. Now, I'll just shoot back up this top row again. So within it, the Arya Deva, the 400 stanzas, got terrific information on impermanence and attachment in particular, desirous attachment in particular. And it's got great antidotes against this. Nagarjuna's letter to a friend, same thing. An open heart, clear mind by Venerable Tripling Chodron, once again has got a great overview of many of the disturbing emotions and the antidotes we can use against them. So I've drawn upon these 7 books plus a couple of others to present this class. Now the Buddha has said that for this particular sutra, the Anguttara Nikaya, he says, possessed of my own deeds, I am the inheritor of deeds, kin to deeds, one who has deeds as a refuge. Whatever deeds I shall do, whether good or evil, I shall become the heir of it. So this teaching sort of took place because what they call a wanderer, a person searching for truth, came across Venerable Ananda, and he asked him about the benefits of abandoning the passions, aversion, and delusion, and what would happen if one did not do so. And so this is basically a teaching on karma. So here Ananda is saying that the individual is responsible for whatever is performed by them, and he is subject to the consequences of his actions. So this is always very valuable to remember when we try to apply the teachings of the Buddha and put them into practice. And in many ways, this verse has a great deal to do with the teaching of today. So we create actions, we engage in actions, and then we experience the consequences of those actions. This is what it sort of means in brief. So we need to be sort of careful about what we do, how we act. Because in brief, we want to be happy, and none of us wish to suffer. And what's being said in this verse is that suffering and unhappiness arise from causes. So now we're going to have a look at these, we call happiness in particular, 2 types of happiness. And the first we'll look at is called temporal happiness. So this is the happiness all of us are familiar with. Right? So we try to be happy in the world we're living in. And how we do that is mainly done by taking our pleasure from the world through our senses. So it's a sort of a pleasure-driven motivation. Now, this happiness is conditioned, being conditioned by our own mind, how we approach it, what the object looks like, and so forth. The happiness itself is changeable, dependent on the senses, like I've said before. There's actually what's called in Buddhism the suffering of change.
So, Eddie, I'm just looking at this picture and thinking about the coronavirus lockdown and how we haven't actually been able to do this for a long time.
Yeah, so not too many people. So people have lost their sense of happiness, haven't they? And now that, you know, the restrictions are loosening, people are becoming happy again. They can go out and have barbecues and spend time with their relatives and so forth. But, you know, as we've also known, as you pointed out, when that's prevented, then we become unhappy. Yet this is this type of happiness we've mainly focused on and relied upon. So we have sought pleasure and happiness in our parents and family, our pets, the home we live in, the country we're in, the society we're in, entertainment culture, and exercise, alcohol, sex, religion, and philosophy. Yet all of these types of happiness are unstable and temporal. They are changeable. Yet for most people all around the world, this is what they think is happiness is. Now, there is another form of happiness that is also possible to attain. It's called genuine happiness or authentic happiness. So let's look at that now. And this type of happiness is not based on what we take from the world, but is based on what we bring to the world. And this bringing to the world is brought forward by us returning to our original nature. So original nature is basically the potential to be fully awakened that we have within us. Now, to do that, we have to relinquish or abandon our bewilderment and confusion. It's the only way we can discover the nature. Now, we can, that abandonment of confusion and bewilderment can take place using primarily two types of mental factors called mindfulness and introspection. So mindfulness means here, I'm trying to get it, is remembering something. And introspection is checking up to see whether we've forgot it or not. So we use mindfulness and introspection to help us return to our original nature and become familiar with it, and allow that nature to express itself naturally in loving kindness and compassion and so forth. Now, to bring about this genuine happiness requires a great deal of work, but it begins by us turning away from the obsessive concerns we have to just this life and taking from the world to be happy. Gradually our concern has to move towards future lives and then to the nature of the cyclic existence we find ourselves in. So there are a number of steps that we need to go through to bring about our genuine happiness. And these number of steps in the practices and the teachings of the Buddha are called the path. So I'm going to now move on to a little bit more about this temporal happiness, which is called dukkha. But before I do, does anybody have any questions about what I've presented so far, or is there anything you'd like to share?
No one's put anything in the chat yet. I did invite people to put things in the chat at any time. Hopefully everybody can find where the chat is. It should be, if you wriggle your mouse around on your screen, there should be a black ribbon along the bottom and a little speech bubble saying chat. If you can't find the chat, folks, then possibly email me and I can ask Eddie that way. But there are no questions yet.
Okay. So finally, in relation to genuine happiness, we have to generate what is called yearning for that. And this genuine happiness is basically freedom from all the afflictive mental states and access to every positive mental state that we have. So that happiness is genuine and authentic, unchangeable. Well, let's now have a look at what we're presently experiencing called dukkha. So there are many different English words for dukkha. One of the most common, of course, being suffering. Another is called unsatisfactory. But I particularly like this phrase. It just means not quite right. And this was a phrase was introduced to our class, one by the present Geshe serving at Chenrezig Institute. Not quite right. Now, to abandon dukkha, things that not be quite right, we need to sort of understand like what it is and what causes it, how to eliminate its causes, and then what are the benefits of doing so. So I've put these 4 points up because I found this as being a very good way of questioning the teachings of the Buddha. So when you're introduced to a new concept, you could ask yourself, like, what is that? Does it have causes? If it does, what are they? How do you eliminate those causes? And then what are the benefits of doing so? So this is particularly relevant in terms of any form of suffering, anxiety, depression, any sort of, we don't normally call negative or painful. These are questions we can use to help us. So first of all, this term dukkha, not quite right. So simply put, this is sort of like pain, suffering. And this can be the suffering of the body or the mind. And it's very easy to recognize because it basically arises from the hardships we engage in as we live our lives. So these are the problems of everyday life, which would include pain, extreme heat and cold, unhappy feelings, sickness, worries, meeting with undesirable objects, difficult circumstances, being separated from the things that we hold dear, and encountering unpleasant situations. So all of that's called dukkha, and it's the most obvious one. All of it, of course, has causes. Those causes, you need to see what can we do to eliminate those causes. But there's another type of dukkha called the unsatisfactoriness of change, or the dukkha of change. So this is referring to the pleasures that we often experience and how if we have too much of it, it becomes very uncomfortable. And then if we lose the pleasure, once again, we experience discomfort and sorrow, sadness, and so forth. So from a Dharma perspective, or from the perspective of the teachings of the Buddha, every form of temporary worldly enjoyment falls into this category. For instance, the pleasure of eating food and drinking delicious drinks, or sitting in the sun during winter, or reading a good book, or engaging in pleasurable sex and so forth. So all of these things are called a hedonic happiness, and none of them are reliable because they are dependent upon the causes and conditions that support them, and those causes and conditions are unstable.
So Eddie, Ganga, who's joining us from Nepal, says that there's a Nepali word dukkha, generally meaning sorrow or pain. So
Yep.
Is that because it comes from that common root of the Sanskrit?
Yes.
Yeah, cool.
Yep, that's right. So yeah, so this is what we're. So what was the gentleman's name?
No, it's Ganga. She's
Ganga.
joining us from Nepal.
Yep, I got it. I understand. I got it. So Ganga, this is quite right. That's right. This is what we're talking about here. There's even a more subtle form of dukkha called the. What do you call this? It's in relationship to the 5 contaminant aggregates that we have as ordinary persons.
Do you mean like restlessness?
No, I mean just the fact that we have a body and mind that's not under our control is dukkha. So having this basis of a body and mind that's not under our control serves as the basis for our present sufferings in the form of aging, sickness and death, but it also promotes future suffering through our usual responses to the painful situations we meet up with. So this is called the suffering of the contaminated aggregates.
And so Anne is asking, is that like an unconscious state of dukkha, that more subtle?
Yes, that's right. We're not conscious. We're not normally conscious of that. That's for sure.
And Martin's saying, is that the all-pervasive one?
And that is the all-pervasive one. Thank you, Martin. That was the term I'd forgotten and was trying to think of. Yeah. So all-pervasive conditioned suffering. And this is basically, it's the causes of it are the grasping and craving, and the karma that arises in response to this craving and grasping. And so those are the deepest roots, deepest causes of things being not quite right. It's because the body and mind are not quite right. And they're not quite right because of the causes that produce them. So this is called dukkha, or the truth of suffering, or the truth of dukkha. Now let's have a look at what Lama Yeshe has to say about this. He says, to gain release from suffering, it's important to understand both the deluded mind and the factors causing our superstitions to arise and increase. Our states of mind are not primarily caused by external conditions. External events are just conditions that have triggered a state of mind. The main cause is internal. So make your mind really straight and thereby help yourself. So, in a way, so let me say, like, we need to help ourselves by really discerning what are the causes of suffering and happiness. And he's saying here the major causes are internal, which brings us back to that slide I talked about of authentic happiness and the happiness that is temporal. So the happiness and the suffering that we experience from the external world is temporal. But there are deeper forms of these, and they're internal, and that's where we need to actually work with. So from Alan Wallace in a book called Embracing Mind, he says that Buddhist psychology and ethics suggest that recognition of the pivotal role of negative mental states and their control is the key to peace at all levels. And there is a teaching that the Buddha gave that says that our human enemies come and go. They may die or move elsewhere or turn into friends through changed circumstances. But the disturbing emotions, the unskillful mental states that we have, they are implacable. They stalk us mercilessly throughout life. And these are our true enemies. So our true enemies are internal and not external. And of these enemies, there are three major ones, and they're called, in some texts, poisons. So I'll just bring these to your attention. So the first is called ignorance or vidya, attachment, raga, and aversion, vesha. So this ignorance is an innate ignorance. And it's a mental factor that's the opposite of the wisdom apprehending selflessness. So all phenomena lack self, meaning that all phenomena lack an objective and independent existence. So all phenomena are without independence, not existing objectively. That's how they actually exist. But ignorance apprehends them opposite to that. Independence upon that superstition or that wrong apprehension, attachment and aversion arise. So attachment here is referring to a form of attachment called desirous attachment. And this is a deluded mental factor that observes its contaminated object. So the object's contaminated because it comes out through karma and disturbing emotions. Yet it regards it as a cause of happiness and wishes for it. So it's a clinging to things that support our sense of permanence. So aversion here could also relate to many different mental factors that are in the same family, things called anger, hatred, and so forth. And once again, but it's a deluded mental factor. And it too observes its contaminated object, exaggerates its bad qualities, and considers it to be undesirable, and then wishes to harm it. It's a pushing away of things that harm our sense of permanence.
Eddie, can you just say a little bit about what do you mean by contaminated object?
Well, the object is contaminated through karma and delusion.
And object, you mean, it can also mean a person?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm. If you took a person, you'd say this person is contaminated with disturbing emotions and unskillful actions that they carry out.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, so these are, in brief, these three poisonous minds, and you can see that they're all mental factors that are deluded, and they all are creators of suffering, produce suffering. Now we're going to go and have a look now at what these are called the four distortions that arise, especially in relationship to ignorance and attachment. Then the four insights we can bring to these four distortions to free us of them, and after that we'll have a look at bit more suffering and its causes. But first of all, the four distortions. So the first one is to see that which is changing to be unchanging. To see happiness as actually a pleasure. That which has no self to have a self, and that which is dependent to not be dependent, but in fact be independent, not dependent. So these are four distortions that the mind creates. In fact, the Buddha said that perceiving permanence in the impermanent, perceiving pleasure in what is not satisfactory or dukkha, perceiving a self in what is not self, and perceiving beauty in what is foul. Beings resort to wrong views, their minds deranged, their perception twisted. So based on not knowing the four attributes of true dukkha, the four distorted conceptions arise in the mind, one after the other. They give rise to afflictions which instigate disturbing mental, verbal, and physical actions, which in turn leave what they call karmic seeds or a potential on the mind stream. So some of these karmic seeds can ripen at the time of death and cause our next rebirth. Others will ripen in future lives, affecting our environment, our habits, and the experiences we undergo. And this is really the meaning of being under the control of afflictions and polluted actions. And it illustrates that we're not free to experience the joy and fulfillment we seek. Nevertheless, we can, and in fact must, try to understand these four distorted conceptions and do that well in order to overcome them. And here they give the example of, you know, if we were in a war or a fight with people or a state or something, we have to learn about the enemy in order to defeat them. So in other words, we need to sort of learn about these distortions and see how they operate within us before we can actually put an end to them. Now, in his book, Samsara and Nirvana, this is a book written by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Venerable Thupten Chodron. From page 20 to about 29 or so, 9 odd pages, there's fantastic information about this in that book. A lot more information that I'm able to give to you today in our brief class. So I do recommend that you have a look at that and see how it plays out. Not only that, I think Glenn Svensson, one of the FPMT registered teachers, teaches quite in depth on this subject, because it has a great relationship to our disturbing emotions, the practice of Mahamudra, and many other practices.
Eddie, can you also just give a quick example of number 3, no self as self? What's an example of when we do that? Have that distortion?
Okay, so so we have a body and a mind, and to think that the self is within that body and mind, independent of it and yet controlling it. Well, there is no self like that. And so we have a self, don't we? We all do. Often, many of us think that the self is within the body and mind controlling it, but there is no self like that. And that's what the term no self refers to here.
Okay, and then the next question is, why is it written happiness is pleasure and not the reverse, pleasure is happiness?
Well, yeah, I did. I actually had it up like that, then had to change it to make sure that we've got that the order sort of flows right.
The consistency.
Yeah, there's consistency in the presentation.
So the distortion is that we think.
We appreciate that when we're experiencing pleasure, this is happiness. So our happiness is related to pleasure.
So we mix up and we think that the pleasure we're experiencing is genuine happiness.
It's genuine happiness, that's right. Yeah. So I remember before, that was a nice way of putting it, Miffy. So before, happiness exists. It's just whether it's going to be temporal or authentic. So we think that the experiencing pleasure is authentic happiness, when in fact it's not. It's temporal happiness, and it has within it dukkha, suffering.
Okie dokie, that's clear. Thanks.
Okay, let's have a look now at the next slide. So we need to bring insight into these four distortions and see things actually as they are. So things as they are is these four steps here. Right? To see the changing as changing, to be impermanent, that anything that is produced is impermanent and not unchanging. So, for an example here, so many of us, many people have an idea of love, and I think most of us, it's romantic love. And we think it's stable and it's going to last. It won't change. But that romantic love is produced, depends upon all sorts of causes and conditions. So it is unstable in nature. It is impermanent. And yet when those changes take place, we can be quite upset about that, or discouraged, unhappy. Whereas if we took it from the beginning, going, oh, I'm in love romantically with this person, I need to understand this is going to change. This will not always be the case.
Yeah, well, that's happened a lot also with this coronavirus situation of everybody spending so much more time together in a small space at home.
That's right. Yeah. So in brief, the four attributes of true dukkha, being impermanent or dukkha, unsatisfactory, empty and selfless, these counteract the four distorted conceptions, believing the impermanent things to be permanent, things that are by nature unsatisfactory to be pleasurable, the unattractive to be attractive, and what lacks a self to have one. A quote from the Buddha, he says, hearing it, wise people regain their sanity. They see the impermanent as permanent, and what is dukkha as dukkha. They see what is not self as not self, and the unattractive as unattractive. By acquiring the right view, they overcome all dukkha. So in brief, the physical and mental aggregates, our body and mind, are impermanent because they undergo continuous momentary arising and disintegration. I often hear this term, they are in flux, they are changeable by nature. There is nothing static for even a moment there. Now, these aggregates are unsatisfactory by nature because they are not under our control. Now, they're under the control of afflictions and karma. Now, the aggregates are empty because they lack a permanent, unitarian, independent self, and they're also selfless because they lack a self-sufficient, substantially existent person. So some of these terms you might not be familiar with, but over time you will become familiar with them and know what they actually mean just by more reading and more study. Now, these first two attributes here, impermanence and unsatisfactory, they center on the aggregates being dependent on causes and conditions. Meaning our body and mind, everything that we feel and think and so forth, are under the control of causes and conditions. And if you can get your head around that, that will lead you to an understanding that the last two attributes, selflessness and emptiness, deny the existence of any kind of independent self or person. So there is no self or person existing independent of this impermanent and unsatisfactory state of affairs that can ever make it right. Now we aren't.
And can you just say that again? Thanks. That one of you know, of how we kind of tend to have grasped to this hope that there is a way that we can fix this.
Well, we can fix it, and we should be hopeful that we can fix it. But to show impermanence and unsatisfactory should point to the idea that the self that does exist, the person who wants to be happy, does not exist independent of impermanence and the unsatisfactory states they experience. Why? Because we aren't free from the aggregates. If we were independent of them, why would we experience impermanence or be unsatisfied with the experiences we go through? So there's no person independent of the experience, right?
Yeah.
There's no person or self that is a different entity from the aggregates. There's no person different from the body and mind. At the same time, we should realize that we are not the body and mind. Not independent, not the same as. So that's a little difficult to get your head around, I know. But the first one, I guess, is to get your head around is first to think not independent. If we were independent, then while our body aged and went through the process of dying and so forth, it shouldn't happen to us, you know, because we're not dependent on the aggregates. We're not dependent on the body and mind if we are independent of them. So that's one type of person that does not exist. We do not exist. We do not have a self that exists like that. Yet, oftentimes, our self will present itself to us as existing like that. So we can't prevent our bodies and minds from aging and dying. So there can't be a sort of an independent, self-sufficient and substantially existent person that is actually controlling the body and mind. There's no controller within the body and mind trying to exert control over it, over the processes. That type of person is selfless. The body and mind are empty of such a person existing within it. And it's often said that a good understanding of subtle impermanence will lead you to the idea of there can't be a person as a real entity independent of this flow of impermanence, trying to guide it. And if you see everything like disintegrating in the moment it's produced, like where's the person in there? Now, like I said, I know this material is not easy to get your head around. These things like, you know, it's not so bad impermanence and unsatisfactory. Yeah, okay, we can do that. Coming to selflessness and emptiness, it's much more difficult. So it does require study, meaning listening to these teachings again and again and reading it again and again, and then applying that knowledge to yourself.
And I'd also jump in there and say that the kind of study is kind of just to take a relaxed and alert mind and enjoy yourself and not try and understand everything all at once, but kind of just be really curious.
And the other, there's that, and the other thing is, do not please think that because you read it and hear it and then one day go, I understand it, you've got it. Understanding is just the first stage of this reading and studying and being curious and so forth. We need to take that understanding and then apply it to the way we live and think and behave. Which leads us to the next slide called this condition, our human condition called dukkha. So there's a very simple way of discovering these four insights. And that is basically is just to sort of, you can do it right now actually, we have time, is to sit in your seat and if you like just sort of close your eyes and just breathe normally and naturally. And you can allow yourself, you can think, you can do, just allow yourself to be present in your seat and to be aware of the sounds around you. My voice, for instance, the different feeling states in your body, perhaps even the rising and falling of the abdomen and upper chest as you breathe normally and naturally. So I'll just ask you a question. So while you're breathing normally and naturally, sitting in your chair, has anything not changed? Each breath is different. Each mental moment is different. Sometimes you'll hear something, sometimes you won't. Other times you'll feel this and then not feel it. You can just become aware of the body itself. It's undergoing continuous change. And you may be aware of that each time your abdomen rises, each time you feel your blood moving through your body, if you can feel your pulse. That is the process of change. So right there is nothing stable within that. Now, within all this process of change and the feelings associated with it, is there anything there in the nature of happiness? So just keep breathing normally and naturally. Allow your feelings to naturally arise. And ask yourself, is there anything here that is in the nature of happiness? Now it's the mind that asks, I ask that question. The mind is aware of the question. It makes an attempt to know whether there is anything there in the nature of happiness. Where is that mind? Now say to yourself, I am searching for the mind. Where is the I that is searching for the mind? Where am I? It is the mind that will provide the answer. Where is the mind? Is there anything here in the nature of happiness? While I've been asking these questions, has anything not changed? Has everything remained the same and stable? And now just gently drop the analysis. Bring your awareness back to the screen and breathe normally and naturally. So these 4 questions are related to the practice of the 4 mindfulnesses of remembering things and investigation. So we find there's nothing stable and unchanging within the body. Later on with feelings, with mind and phenomena itself. So everything is impermanent. Everything is undergoing change. You can ask this question in relationship to the mind or the body again. And the mind was really looking at the feelings that are experienced within the mind. Any of the feelings that I've experienced when I was doing these searches, or even trying to find feeling itself, is there anything there in the nature of happiness? That question might throw us, actually. Where is the mind? This is in relation to mind itself. Where am I? It's to do with the phenomena. So mindfulness of body, feelings, mind, and phenomena, called the 4 mindfulnesses. So I'll just pause here and again, open it up for questions.
There aren't any questions yet, but people have a chance to write something in the chat. I found that meditation quite extraordinary, and it did throw me that question about is anything in the nature of happiness. The actual process of investigating was really joyous.
Yeah, I found the same affair. That's, when I was up at CI when Glenn did that course, we didn't do it like this, but when I applied it to myself, my gosh, it's so straightforward. So I thought I'll introduce this to our DB classes. We can discover this. It's not something we have to believe. We can know it through just asking these questions in relationship to the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena.
There's also something slightly unsettling about it that reminds me of when you see a really good magic trick and you just don't know what happened, but it's also really fun.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And disconcerting.
Yeah. So okay, let's as a suggestion to those who are in the class today, this is quite a nice meditation, I think. It's a meditation of discovery, where what you thought might have been true, you discover, gee, I don't know. What I thought was true, I can't be sure of it anymore.
Yeah, Martin has just said liberating experience there.
Okay. So we're going to, the next slide I'm going to introduce you to, called Suffering and Its Causes. There's a great deal that could be said about it, and unfortunately we won't have enough time to do that, but I'll let you know that it'll come up again in 2 of the next classes. So I'll just like introduce you to it, and then we'll move on. So here we have a picture of a man with a gun to his head, and it's going to be called Suffering and Its Causes. So here, this gentleman, if he pulls the trigger, will experience what we call the suffering of death, and there are causes for him to pull that trigger. And here we have 6 types of causes that I'm going to put up, and we can oppose each and every one of them. So the first cause here is sort of actually, it's 2, but we can combine them into 1. So that's called the latency in the object, and the actual, the other causes the seed and the mistaken dualistic appearance. So what is this talking about? So the object here is the appearance of phenomena to be independent of our senses and to objectively exist. And the latency is within our own mind to apprehend things to exist like that. So being unenlightened people, and even if you're on the what they call the 8th ground, this would still appear, the latency would still appear. The latency is this latency, or the potential to see things to be inherently existent, meaning to exist objectively and independent of our senses. But so you can just check that just by opening your eyes up, looking at anything or eating anything, and you'll see that there's something objective and independent of you, which contains qualities and characteristics and so forth. It's got nothing to do with your mind. So that's always there. Now, we have within us what they call, the seed to apprehend those sort of things. So why it's put up as 2 things, latency and seed, is the seed can be removed, but the latency still appears. So now we have the seed within us, this potential to take things to be inherently existent, to actually exist as they're appearing to us. So we have this dualistic appearance, and we're sort of it's appearing that way, and we're believing it to exist in that way. And that's just the way we are right now.
Is that kind of the thing, that grasping at trying to find an objective truth, for example?
Yep, we're holding truths to exist objectively. That's right. Yep. That'll be an example of one. So this is the way it is. This is naturally for us. But we haven't put an end to this, so we need to sort of realize, okay, phenomena do exist to be independent of us. I'm here, the whole world is there, and that's the way it is. It looks that way. We have the potential within us to agree with that. So we have the appearance. It's called a mistaken dualistic appearance because it actually, it doesn't actually, it appears that way but doesn't exist that way. So if we believe that the appearance is the same as existing that way, that's the mistake. But so the vast majority of human beings, animals, both have this. And they apprehend it like this and they believe it. So in terms of the latency or this stain of inherent existence, How can we oppose that? Well, that requires a lot of reading and knowledge, and then accepting that this is actually the way it does look.
Jan Mastenbroek's got a question. Is latency an attribute of the mind and the seed a condition? Or is that a topic for another day?
What was the first bit? Latency meaning?
An attribute of the mind.
The attribute of mind, yes.
And then seed a condition?
Yeah, seed, cause, condition, same. Yeah, so although it appears this way, it doesn't follow that we have to grasp at it to exist that way. In other words, we don't have to believe in the appearances. But that requires to have a very strong sense of mindfulness and a very sort of strong mind. So that the strength of this mind will be developed through the practice of mindfulness and introspection. So although the appearance will always appear that way, we need the way for us at present, the simple way to do is just try to avoid those objects. Right? So like if we take simple one, right? I'm a man, I see an attractive woman. Right? To my mind, that attractive woman appears independent of me, an object existing within itself, and all of it, the qualities, the beauty are within the woman. I'm just sort of like seeing them, that's it. It's got nothing to do with me. Now, this is just the way it is, right? Now, if I was to start pursuing every beautiful woman that I saw with this idea, which many people do, of course, we get ourselves into trouble. So how can we not do that? The simplest way to do is just make sure you don't run into beautiful women at home. That's the simplest thing you can do. You're not going to be able to just stop women looking at beautiful and from their own side and so forth. Right? So this works with beauty and of course ugliness. The objects will appear that way to you. You will believe it. If you have it, then either aversion and anger and all these negative ways of behavior and thinking will arise upon the ugly. Desirous attachment will arise and depends upon the beauty. If you follow along with either of them and become angry or lustful and chase them and so forth, and you know that this is a problem for you.
So then, Eddie, if you don't want to go through your life with your head in a paper bag, what do you do? Well,
we're going to work down the 6 steps, and we can find plenty of other places we can actually do things. Right, so this is just the first part. For most of us here, there's very little you can do. Nothing, like I said, the thing you can do is stay in your room, put a bag over your head. That's it. So probably none of us are going to do that. Right?
Or the other thing that people try and do is make all women put a bag over their head.
Yeah, well, that's what they do, isn't it? Women, you wear headscarves. You're the problem. You're making me feel horny. You're driving me crazy. This is, mistaken too. So we need the way here like this to avoid getting into trouble. We can oppose it by avoiding contact with these objects that we have difficulties with. The second thing we can do is question the appearance of these objects to ourselves. So we question, when you see the beautiful woman or the ugly man or whatever it is, do these objects naturally exist as they appear to be? That's a question we can ask ourselves. Now, of course, they don't, but we've actually, if we, that's what I'm saying about mindfulness, we've got to actually remember to oppose it by either avoiding contact or questioning the appearance. Now, when we come into contact with an object, a feeling will arise. And this feeling will be either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral in regard to that object. So how do we oppose, like grasp with the feeling and running with it? So once again, it comes to mindfulness. One way of opposing it is just to watch it, the feeling, and just let it arise and go. But to do that, we've got to sort of remember to do it. So for once again, so this will also be quite difficult to do. But it can be done. And the way to train ourselves in doing that is just by like being at home, sitting down and applying mindfulness to our feelings. Like, all right, let them come up, acknowledge that they're coming up, not, we might even name them, go, oh, that's sadness. It'll vanish. Oh, that feeling, that's the feeling of lust or desire. It vanishes. In fact, I think it's, if these feelings are very strong, they don't last any longer than 90 seconds. Feelings just don't do that. But because we grasp at them again and again, they last longer. So by just sitting and bearing the discomfort of these feelings, they will arise and go. But if we don't do it, we'll grasp at them with ignorance, we'll grab them to be true, and then we're going to sort of act on them. So this, the next thing, of course, is what they call the misconception. So the misconception is that the feeling or whatever is appearing to me is inherently attractive, inherently unattractive, or inherently neutral. Right? In other words, that these feelings are existing objectively. They're existing in and of themselves. It's really got, it's like it's happening to me. So we need to oppose this too. We can do this by really questioning the appearance, by recollecting the term called the eye of the beholder. So you might have heard of this term. I think Shakespeare used it, where beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Ugliness, it must also be in the eye of the beholder. My indifference must also be in the eye of the beholder. So the beauty, the pleasant, the unpleasant, and the neutral is not actually findable within the objects, but they're coming from my side. So this is another way of opposing getting ourselves into trouble. There are a couple of other things in terms of the selflessness and the emptiness. We say that the possessor of its parts cannot be independent of the parts. And to remember, if the qualities and characteristics of an object can't be found within the object, it can't be found as real things within you, the subject. Now, instead, they exist as mere labels and names. So here we're bringing into one is the method eye of the beholder. The other two ways of doing it are using understandings of emptiness and dependent arising. Independence upon this misconception, the actual poisons will arise, aversion, attachment, and confusion in relationship to the feelings that we're having. Now, Here is where we're probably most liable to work practically with this, but to do that we have to recollect impermanence, that our attachment, aversion and confusion are actually changeable states. So if we could just watch them, allow them to naturally release by relaxing, and then we just return to our knowledge. Okay, so now we're not always able to do that. Instead of that, we'll carry out some sort of action. We'll behave in some way. Now, when our behaviors are unskillful, then we need to oppose them later on with the four opponent powers of regret, reliance, recompense, and a refusal to act like that again for a period of time. Now, suppose we can't do all of that, and now we're actually in the state of suffering. Now, while the suffering is going on, we can oppose it by recollecting once again impermanence, watch it, allow it to release through relaxing, and then returning to an acceptance of the situation. And now we get an and or, and we could practice the Tonglen practice. So when we're suffering like this, we know, okay, it's all impermanent and so forth, but I'm experiencing it. So I remember that I could develop compassion and kindness in response to suffering. Let me take it and place it upon my indifference to the suffering of others and myself. Let me extend kindness to myself and others, and exhale. So there's a lot you can do with this knowledge, but it requires to remember to do it. It requires a remembrance of these 6 steps and information about each of them. So I'm not going to ask you now for more questions here, because this will come up again, and you can see there's a lot in this. And this is just one sort of mapping of suffering and its causes and what we can do in relationship to those causes. Now, the Buddha said that intangible and subtle is the mind, that flies after fancies as it likes. Wise are those who discipline their minds, for a well-disciplined mind brings great joy. And this discipline I'm going to suggest is the discipline of being mindful and using introspection to see when you're not so mindful. In relationship to that meditation I led you through, there is that when you sit there on your seat and ask those 4 questions, you see this: in the seen, there is only the seen. In the heard, there is only the heard. Meaning that what you see, there is just that. Don't bring anything else into it. When you listen, don't bring anything else into it. Don't bring ideas, thoughts, anything. Just hear, the sound will arise, it will vanish. In the felt, there is only the felt. And in the known, there is only the known. In other words, simply attend to the impressions of mental, visual, auditory, and tactile events, seeing them for what they are: empty, dukkha, impermanent, selfless. All perceptions, desires, fears, memories, and fantasies simply arise and are recognized as mental events. And when you cease reifying yourself, you will then cease reifying the appearances to the mind. You'll see that there's no thing here. Indeed, there is no thing there. There aren't any reified objects existing independently in and of themselves. The Buddha goes on to say that as you see that there is no thing there, you will see that you are therefore located neither in the world of this, nor in the world of that, nor in any place between the two. This alone is the end of suffering.
Can you just read that again, Eddie?
Okay. As you see that there is no thing there, you will see that you are therefore located neither in the world of this, nor in the world of that, nor in any place between the two. This alone is the end of suffering. So this is once again, of course, taken from one of the sutras, but it's in a book called Minding Closely by B. Alan Wallace. It's on page 75. And this book is about training in those four mindfulness practices. Now you can see here, well, I hope you can see here, that the causes of suffering and the causes of an authentic happiness are within us. They're primarily dependent upon mind and not the external objects. So wishing to be happy is actually an inner pursuit. When we decide to, through this idea of changing the view, not trying to take from the world and be happy, but bring to the world and the authentic way of being in it, a way of being in the world with wisdom and compassion and kindness. Now, to actually bring about this change of world, this change of view, which we can do, we have to actually discern the differences between hedonic and authentic sources of happiness. Then we need to stop being confused between hedonic and authentic sources of happiness. And then act in accordance with the principles of karmic cause and effect. So karmic cause and effect means inner cause and effect. The causes and effects that the mind produce. But by doing so, we can protect ourselves from future harm, remove obstacles to practice, and create causes for our future happiness. So in other words, bringing a new purpose to life, through our lives. And this is the purpose that the Dalai Lama often says to himself, and I think it's a very good one, and we could use it ourselves. So, I am fortunate to be alive. I have a precious human life. I'm not going to waste it. I'm going to use all my energies to develop myself, to expand my heart out to others, to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. So this, of course, all depends upon us becoming inner beings, relying upon our inner resources, and becoming really familiar with positive states of mind and decreasing the negative states of mind. So I hope by presenting this, you are inspired to do that. When you understand, like I said, that you will never ever have an authentic happiness by relying upon your senses and bringing in the data to try and be happy. It doesn't work. Seeing that it doesn't work and yet happiness exists, we need to rely upon our inner resources. So what the mind can provide, what a disciplined mind can provide us with. So I hope you'll take up the challenge over time and try to become authentic, happy people. So in summary, we've looked at these two forms of happiness. Sources of happiness, sources of suffering, they're both the mind. Sources of happiness are a disciplined mind that are free of the distortions. And the sources of suffering actually arise from the distortions. These distortions have antidotes. To bring about an authentic form of happiness, we'll need to change our worldview. And in response to that change, a new purpose will unfold for us. So this brings us to the end of our class. So here are some of the readings you could have a look at. You can see on the readings that Miffy has put up in the members area. There's a section called 01, and have a look at pages 11 to 16 and 21 to 31. And there's another group of teachings under a thing called 05, Buddhist Psychology, pages 91 and 94. And coming up, we'll have a look at these 3 levels of suffering, attachment, and how we can oppose that, and some of the causes for genuine happiness. So, yeah, I think we've looked at a lot of material here today.
Certainly, it's a blockbuster class, Eddie. Fantastic.
Yeah, and so there's a lot to think about. But what I'd like to leave you with a sense of that it can be done, and in a way that it really has to be done, it must be done by us when we see that we can never be authentically happy by doing what we've continued to do, which is rely on the outer world as a form for generating authentic, genuine happiness. It can't be done. Yet we still have this desire for happiness. So let's dedicate your efforts of listening to this and try to comprehend it, and perhaps even meditating on it, and my efforts in presenting the class to you. May the merit we've generated in the present, in the past, and in the future, which exist like dreams and in mere name, which have been created by us, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and all sentient beings, who exist too, like dreams and in mere name, be a means for us to achieve enlightenment, which is dreamlike and exists in mere name, thereby leading all dreamlike sentient beings to enlightenment, which is like a dream existing in mere name, by ourselves alone, which don't exist from their own side, from the side of the body and mind, but exist in name only. So, thank you, everybody.